The gentle current drifted through space like a silver leaf on a quiet pond. Its hull gleamed under the light of distant stars as the research ship moved slowly toward the edge of known space. Inside the ship, Cathara pressed her six-fingered hand against the cool metal wall inside. She was tired. 3 months of studying empty space had given her nothing but readings of cosmic dust and old radiation. The Zephyrian Science Council had sent her team to map stellar formations near the outer rim, but so far they had found only darkness and silence. Cathara walked through the narrow hallways of her ship. Her blue-green skin caught the soft light from the walls, and her large eyes looked heavy with boredom. Being a xenobiologist meant studying life, but out here in the empty void, there was no life to study. The bridge was quiet when she arrived. Her crew of 5 other Zephyrians sat at their stations, monitoring equipment that had shown nothing interesting for weeks. Their homeworld was known for producing the galaxy's best scientists, but even the best scientists needed something to study. "Captain," called Vexhai from the communications station. His voice carried a note of confusion. "I'm picking up something strange." Cathara moved to his station quickly. "What kind of strange?" "It's a signal, very faint, but it's repeating the same message over and over." Vexhai adjusted his controls and a crackling sound filled the bridge. Through the static they could hear words in Old Galactic Standard. "Help us. Location 379 Mark 882. They took everyone. Help us. Location 379 Mark 882. They took everyone." The message repeated, endlessly, growing weaker with each cycle. Cathara felt her heart rate increase. That location was in the Hadrian system, a place marked as dangerous in all their star charts. "How long has this been broadcasting?" she asked. "The signal degradation suggests weeks, maybe months," Vexhai replied. "But Captain, those coordinates are in quarantine space. The concordance forbids travel there." Cathara knew about the quarantine. The Hadrian system had been marked as off-limits after reports of aggressive species activity. The official record said the area was too dangerous for civilian ships. But listening to that desperate voice calling for help, she felt something she had not felt in months. Purpose. "Plot a course for those coordinates," she ordered. Her crew looked at her with surprise. Jixara, her second-in-command, spoke up. "Captain, that system is controlled by the hegemony. If the reports are true, they don't welcome visitors." "Someone is asking for help," Cathara replied firmly. "We're scientists. Our job is to discover truth, not hide from it." The gentle current changed course, its engines humming as it accelerated toward the forbidden system. The journey took 2 days, and with each passing hour the signal grew stronger. By the time they reached the edge of Hadrian space, they could hear the message clearly. The voice sounded young, frightened, and completely exhausted. What they found when they arrived made Cathara wish she had never heard that signal. The first planet in the system had been beautiful once. Cathara could see evidence of oceans and forests in the scarred landscape below. But now, massive mining machines crawled across its surface like metal insects. The entire world looked like it had been torn apart and rebuilt as a factory. "Captain," whispered Telmar from the sensor station. "I'm reading life signs down there, millions of them, but they're all concentrated in small areas." Cathara stared at the readings. The life signs formed perfect rectangles across the planet's surface. Prison camps. Someone had turned an entire world into a massive prison and forced labor facility. "Move us to the next planet," she ordered quietly. The second world was worse. The third made her crew sick to look at. Every planet in the system showed the same pattern. Beautiful worlds stripped bare, their populations herded into camps, forced to work until they died. The hegemony had turned the entire Hadrian system into a slave empire. Large warships patrolled between the planets. Their hulls were black and covered with weapon ports. These were not exploration vessels or research ships. These were instruments of war and oppression. "Captain," Vexhai called urgently, "3 hegemony ships are moving toward us. They're demanding we identify ourselves." Cathara felt fear crawl up her spine. The gentle current was a research ship with minimal shields and no weapons. Against even one hegemony warship, they would be helpless. "Send a message. Tell them we're conducting routine stellar surveys." The response came back immediately, and in harsh, clipped tones. "Unknown vessel, this system is under hegemony protection. Leave now or be destroyed." "Do it," Cathara ordered. "Get us out of here." The gentle current turned and accelerated as fast as its engines could manage. Behind them, the 3 hegemony ships followed for several minutes before turning back to their patrol routes. Cathara and her crew sat in shocked silence as they reached safe space. "How many?" she asked finally. Telmar checked his readings again. "Based on the life sign concentrations, I estimate between 2 and 3 billion sentient beings across all 7 planets, all in forced labor camps." The number hit Cathara like a physical blow. 3 billion people enslaved, worked to death, forgotten by the galaxy. And the Concordants knew. They had to know. That's why the system was quarantined, not to protect travelers from danger, but to hide the hegemony's crimes. She made her decision quickly, before fear could change her mind. "Vexahai, open a channel on emergency frequency 7 Alpha. The old diplomatic channel. Captain, that frequency hasn't been used in 30 years. Not since the humans went quiet." "Open it anyway." Vexahai worked his controls, and soon the bridge filled with the soft hum of an open transmission. Cathara took a deep breath and began to speak. "This is Captain Cathara of the research vessel Gentle Current. I am broadcasting a general distress call to any ships monitoring this frequency. We have discovered a massive humanitarian crisis in the Hadrian system. Billions of sentient beings are being held in forced labor camps by the hegemony. The situation is critical and requires immediate intervention." She paused, then added the coordinates and everything they had observed. When she finished, the bridge fell silent. "Do you think anyone is listening?" asked Jixara. Cathara stared out at the stars. Somewhere in the darkness, the desperate voice was still calling for help. Somewhere else, 3 billion people worked in chains while the galaxy looked away. "I hope so," she said quietly. "I really hope so." The Gentle Current turned toward home, carrying news that would soon wake something the galaxy had almost forgotten. In the depths of space, an old frequency carried new purpose. And in a distant system that most beings had forgotten existed, monitoring stations that had been silent for decades suddenly came alive. The message had been heard. The sleeping giant was beginning to stir, but Cathara didn't know that yet. All she knew was that she had done what she could. She had seen horror and called for help. Whether help would come, only time would tell. The stars offered no answers, only silence. But somewhere in that silence, ancient systems were awakening. Somewhere in the darkness, humanity was remembering what it meant to protect those who could not protect themselves. Luna Station hung in the darkness above Earth's moon like a metal city built among the stars. Its massive communication arrays pointed in all directions, listening to the galaxy's whispers. For 30 years, those arrays had been mostly silent, receiving only automated signals and commercial broadcasts. Admiral Chen Wei-Ming walked through the station's command center, with slow, careful steps. His gray hair and weathered face told the story of someone who had seen too much and lived too long. At 72, he was one of the few people left who remembered when humanity reached out to the stars with open hands instead of closed fists. The night shift was quiet. Most of the communication officers sat at their stations, monitoring routine traffic between Earth and the outer colonies. Mars was reporting good crop yields. Titan's fuel refineries were running at full capacity. Europa's underwater cities were expanding. Life in the Sol system was peaceful and isolated, just as humanity had chosen it to be after the Great Recession. That peace ended at 0347 hours when Lieutenant Reyes called out from her station. "Admiral, I've got something strange on the emergency frequency. Channel 7 Alpha." Chen stopped walking. Channel 7 Alpha was the old diplomatic frequency, used back when humanity maintained embassies and trade posts throughout the galaxy. No one had transmitted on that channel since the withdrawal. "Put it through," he ordered. The bridge speakers crackled to life, and a female voice with a Zephyrian accent filled the room. Chen listened in growing tension as Captain Cathara described the horrors of the Hadrian system. When she mentioned the coordinates, his blood went cold. He knew those coordinates. Every officer of his generation knew them. "Lieutenant, pull up the colonial records for the Hadrian system. Authorization Chen 7 Alpha 9. Reyes's fingers flew over her controls. Data began appearing on the main screen, file after file of information that had been classified for decades. Chen read through reports that made him feel sick to his stomach. New Harmony. Population 847,000 humans and allied species. Status evacuated Port Endeavor. Population 1.2 million humans and allied species. Status evacuated Genesis Station. Population 230,000 humans and allied species. Status evacuated 17 colonies in total, all marked as evacuated during humanity's retreat from galactic affairs. But as Chen dug deeper into the classified files, he found the reports that only a few people had ever seen. The real reports. The colonies hadn't been evacuated. They had been abandoned. When humanity pulled back to Sol after the economic collapse, there hadn't been enough ships to bring everyone home. The politicians and military leaders had made a horrible choice. They saved who they could and left the rest behind, telling the galaxy that everyone had been safely relocated. It was a lie that let humanity retreat with honor, instead of admitting they had abandoned their own people. For 30 years, those colonists had been forgotten. And now, if the Zephyrian captain was right, they were slaves. Chen's hand shook as he opened the final classified file. It contained a list of names. Every man, woman, and child who had been left behind when humanity went dark. 3,700,000 people. Entire families. Whole communities. All written off as casualties of economic necessity. "Admiral," Lieutenant Reyes asked quietly. "What do we do?" Chen stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he reached for his communication device and began making calls that would wake up people who hadn't expected to be disturbed. The first call went to General Morrison on Mars. The second went to Admiral Petrov commanding the Titan fleet. The third went to President Harrison in Geneva. Each conversation was short, direct, and ended with the same words. Emergency session, 1 hour. Within minutes, the command center filled with senior officers. Video screens lit up with faces from across the Sol system. Earth's president appeared alongside the colonial governors of Mars, Europa, and Titan. The commanders of humanity's scattered fleets joined from their ships. Chen stood before them and played the Zephyrian captain's message. When it finished, the room was silent. "How many?" asked President Harrison. 3,700,000 were left behind. Chen replied. "If they survived the initial hegemony invasion, they've been slaves for 30 years. General Morrison leaned forward, on his screen. "Admiral, those colonies were officially evacuated. The records show—" "The records lie," Chen interrupted. "I helped write those lies. We all did. We told ourselves it was necessary. We told ourselves they would find a way to survive until we could come back for them. We told ourselves a lot of things so we could sleep at night." The silence stretched on. These were leaders who had made hard decisions before, but this was different. This was about family. This was about the promise that humanity never left anyone behind. President Harrison spoke first. "What are our options?" Admiral Petrov pulled up tactical displays. "Our deep space capabilities are limited. We've focused on system defense for 30 years. The hegemony controls multiple star systems and has a large fleet." "What about our industrial capacity?" asked the governor of Mars. "That's different," replied General Morrison. "We've spent 30 years building up our infrastructure. Our shipyards can produce vessels faster than any known species. Our manufacturing capabilities exceed pre-recession levels by 400%. Chen nodded. "The question isn't whether we can build a fleet capable of challenging the hegemony. The question is whether we will." Governor Chen of Europa leaned forward. "Admiral, with respect, we chose isolation for good reasons. The galaxy is dangerous. Getting involved in conflicts led to the recession in the first place." "The galaxy didn't come to us," Chen replied firmly. "Our own people called for help. The same people we abandoned 30 years ago are still out there, still hoping someone will remember them." The debate that followed lasted 3 hours. Voices were raised. Arguments flew back and forth about costs, risks, and consequences. Some leaders worried about exposing humanity's rebuild capabilities to potential enemies. Others argued that military action would invite retaliation against Sol itself. In the end, it was President Harrison who called for the vote. All in favor of military intervention to rescue human populations in hegemony space? The votes came in one by one. Mars, yes. Europa, yes. Titan, yes. The asteroid belt colonies, yes. The outer system settlements, yes. When the final count was taken, the result was unanimous. Chen felt something he hadn't felt in 30 years. Purpose. "General Morrison, I want production schedules for a deep space fleet. Nothing fancy, just ships that can fight and win." Admiral Petrov, "Start pulling together crews from across the system." President Harrison, "We'll need authorization to activate the reserve protocols." As the meeting ended and screens went dark, Chen remained in the command center. Lieutenant Reyes approached him carefully. "Admiral, what are the reserve protocols?" Chen looked out at the stars through the station's observation windows. "Something we hoped we'd never need to use, Lieutenant. When humanity retreated, we didn't just abandon our colonies. We abandoned our role as protectors. The reserve protocols are our way back." Over the next few days, messages began flowing through the Sol system on frequencies that hadn't been used in decades. Ancient shipyards came online. Manufacturing facilities that had been idle began producing materials of war. The asteroid mining stations revealed themselves to be something more than simple extractors. Humanity had spent 30 years in isolation, but they hadn't spent those years sleeping. They had spent them preparing for the day when someone would need their help again. That day had come. The sleeping giant was opening its eyes, and when it stood up, the galaxy would remember why humans were called Deathworlders. Captain Sarah Okafor stood on the bridge of the unconquered sun and watched her homeworld grow smaller behind them. Earth looked peaceful from space, its blue oceans and white clouds hiding the massive industrial effort that had produced her fleet in just 6 weeks. The unconquered sun was humanity's first dreadnought-class warship, but it was not alone. Around it moved a fleet of 60 ships that represented 30 years of secret preparation, destroyers that could outrun anything in known space, cruisers armed with weapons that violated several galactic treaties, support vessels that carried enough supplies to keep the fleet operating for years without returning home. Sarah had commanded civilian ships before the activation, trade vessels that carried cargo between Earth and Mars, peaceful work for peaceful times. But she had also trained for this moment, in simulators that most civilians didn't know existed. Every human ship captain had trained for this moment. "Captain," called Commander Park from the sensor station. "All ships report ready for hyperspace transition." Sarah nodded. "Begin the jump sequence. Destination, Kepler Station." The fleet disappeared into hyperspace, leaving Earth's system for the first time in 30 years. Their journey would take them through several systems before reaching hegemony space. And Sarah knew that word of their passage would spread quickly. The galaxy thought humanity had forgotten how to build warships. They were about to learn how. Wrong they were. 3 days later, the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace near Kepler Station, an old trading post that had served as a neutral meeting point for multiple species. The station's commander, a Centaurian named Vexthor, nearly choked on his morning meal when his sensors detected the approaching ships. "By the ancient stars," he whispered. "What are those things?" His communication officer, equally shocked, managed to stammer out a response. "Sir, they're broadcasting human identification codes. But these designs, they're nothing like the old human ships we have in our databases." Vexthor stared at the tactical display. The smallest ship in the human fleet was larger than his station's defense platforms. The largest was a monster that made his station look like a shuttlecraft. "Open a channel," he ordered. Sarah's face appeared on the main screen, calm and professional. "Kepler Station, this is Captain Okafor of the Earth Fleet. We're requesting permission to dock and resupply." "Captain Okafor," Vexthor replied carefully. "Forgive my confusion, but we haven't seen human vessels in this area for many years, and these ship designs are unfamiliar." "Humanity has been busy, Station Commander. We've had time to make improvements." That was an understatement that would become legendary. As the human fleet approached the station, Vexthor's sensors revealed details that made him question everything he thought he knew about human capabilities. The ship's hull armor was unlike anything in his databases. Their power signatures suggested fusion reactors more advanced than most species' industrial facilities. Their weapon ports were numerous and large enough to mount capital ship guns. This wasn't a fleet that had been quickly assembled. This was a fleet that had been planned and built with decades of forethought. "Commander," his science officer reported quietly, "I'm detecting some unusual readings from the asteroid field near the station." Vexthor frowned. "What kind of readings?" "Power signatures. Very faint but consistent with advanced technology." "Sir, I think there might be something hidden in those asteroids." As the human ships moved past the asteroid field, several large rocks suddenly lit up with energy. What had appeared to be natural asteroids revealed themselves to be camouflaged observation posts, their sensors tracking every ship that passed through the system. "How long have those been there?" Vexthor asked. Sarah's voice came through the communication channel, though she hadn't been asked the question directly. "About 28 years, Commander. We've been keeping an eye on things." The implications hit Vexthor like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't retreated from the galaxy. They had repositioned. For 3 decades they had been watching, learning, preparing. Every species in the galaxy had assumed the humans had given up on space travel. Instead, they had been building the most advanced fleet anyone had ever seen. The human ships docked, with his station, and Vexthor got his first close look at their technology. The materials were unfamiliar but clearly superior to standard construction. The weapon systems were modular and could apparently be reconfigured based on mission requirements. The shield generators produced energy fields that his sensors couldn't fully analyze, but it was the crew that impressed him most. These weren't inexperienced colonists playing at being soldiers. These were professionals who moved with the confidence of people who had trained for years. They were polite but alert, friendly but ready for trouble. Commander Park joined Captain Okafor for a brief meeting with Vexthor in the station's conference room. "Captain," Vexthor said carefully, "may I ask where you're heading?" "We received a distress call," Sarah replied. "Human colonists in the Hadrian system. We're going to bring them home." The Hadrian system is controlled by the hegemony. They have a substantial fleet presence there. "We know." Vexthor studied her face. There was no boast in her voice, no dramatic threats, just quiet confidence that worried him more than any amount of bluster would have. "Captain, the hegemony has been expanding for decades. They're not known for negotiating." "Neither are we," Commander Park replied mildly. The human fleet left Kepler Station 12 hours later, fully supplied and ready for combat. As they jumped to hyperspace, Vexthor immediately sent messages to every contact he had in the region. Word spread quickly, through the trading networks and diplomatic channels. Humanity was back, and they were armed for war. The next system the human fleet entered was controlled by the hegemony. 3 patrol ships moved to intercept them, demanding identification and surrender. The lead hegemony captain, a reptilian creature named Skorthak, had destroyed dozens of civilian vessels over the years. He approached the unknown ships with the confidence of someone who had never met serious resistance. His confidence lasted until his sensors got a clear reading on the human fleet. "What in the void are those things?" he muttered, staring at readings. That seemed impossible. His tactical officer, equally confused, reported energy signatures that exceeded their own fleet's capabilities by several orders of magnitude. "Sir, recommend we call for reinforcements." "From ships this primitive?" Skorthak sneered. "These humans disappeared for 30 years. They probably can't even maintain their weapons systems properly." He opened fire on the smallest human ship, expecting to disable it quickly and demand surrender from the rest. His plasma bolts struck the human destroyer's shields and simply disappeared. The shields didn't even flicker. The human response was swift and devastating. 3 precise shots from the destroyer's main guns turned Skorthak's ship into expanding vapor. The other 2 hegemony ships lasted slightly longer, but only because the humans seemed to be taking time to study their weapon systems and tactics. Within 10 minutes, the hegemony patrol was destroyed. The human fleet continued on its path without slowing down. Sarah stood on her bridge and watched the debris field drift past. "Analysis? Their technology is about 20 years behind ours," Commander Park reported. "Decent firepower, but their tactical thinking is limited. They rely on intimidation and overwhelming numbers. That works well against civilians and lightly armed opponents," Sarah observed. "Not so well against people who were raised on a world where everything tries to kill you." The fleet jumped to hyperspace again, leaving behind wreckage that would soon be discovered by hegemony reinforcements. When those reinforcements arrived and saw what remained of 3 warships, they sent urgent messages to their commanders. Something new had entered hegemony space. Something that could destroy their best ships without taking damage. Something that moved with purpose and precision. Something that was heading directly for the heart of their empire. The sleeping giant was fully awake now, and it was angry. The Hadrian system's main fortress world had never fallen to enemy attack. Hadrian Prime was protected by overlapping shield generators, orbital defense platforms, and a fleet of 200 warships. The hegemony had spent decades turning it into an unbreakable stronghold. General Kraktor stood in the fortress command center and watched his sensors track the approaching human fleet. 60 ships against 200 seemed like good odds to him. He had destroyed larger forces before. "Sir," reported his tactical officer, "the human ships are maintaining standard formation. No apparent attempt at stealth or misdirection." Kraktor nodded. He had studied the old records of human military tactics. They were straightforward fighters who relied on superior numbers and basic strategies. This small fleet would be easy prey for his experienced commanders. "Signal all ships to attack formation. We'll destroy them before they reach the outer defense perimeter." The hegemony fleet moved to intercept, their black warships spreading out in a hunting formation that had worked against dozens of species over the years. Kraktor settled back in his command chair, already planning how he would display the wreckage of the human ships. His confidence lasted exactly 18 minutes. The Battle of Hadrian's Gate began when the human fleet suddenly scattered in all directions. Instead of maintaining their formation, they split into small groups that attacked from multiple angles at once. This wasn't the straightforward tactics Kraktor expected. This was something entirely different. The first surprise came when a human cruiser fired what appeared to be simple kinetic rounds at 3 hegemony destroyers. The rounds seemed to miss their targets, passing harmlessly into space. Kraktor smiled until his sensors detected what was actually happening. The rounds were using the gravity well of a nearby asteroid to curve their trajectory. Physics became a weapon as the projectiles swung around the asteroid and struck the hegemony ships from behind where their shields were weakest. All 3 destroyers died in the first exchange. Impossible, Kraktor roared. No one fights like that. But the humans were just getting started. A human destroyer launched what looked like mining charges toward a cluster of asteroids. The charges exploded and sent thousands of rock fragments flying toward the hegemony formation. By itself, this would have been a minor annoyance, but the humans had calculated the timing perfectly. As the hegemony ships raised their forward shields to protect against the debris, human attack craft swept in from below and targeted their exposed engines. 6 more hegemony ships died in explosions that lit up the darkness. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "the humans are broadcasting on all frequencies." "What are they saying?" "They're not talking to us, sir. They're talking to the planets." On every world in the Hadrian system, human voices began speaking. In hundreds of languages. The message was simple and repeated endlessly. "Attention all enslaved populations. The Deathworlders have arrived. Resistance fighters prepare for weapon drops. Civilian populations seek shelter. Liberation begins now." Kraktor felt a chill run through his body. The humans weren't just attacking his fleet, they were starting a system-wide revolution. The battle in space continued with increasing desperation on the hegemony side. Every time Kraktor's ships adapted to human tactics, the humans changed their approach. They used debris fields as cover, turned enemy missiles against each other and employed boarding tactics that seemed suicidal until they worked perfectly. Human marines in powered armor cut through hegemony ships like knives through paper. They moved in small teams, struck vital systems, and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. Hegemony soldiers trained to fight against other civilized species had no idea how to handle opponents who treated impossible odds as normal obstacles. But the real shock came when the orbital defense platforms began targeting each other. "Sir," his tactical officer screamed, "Defense Platform 7 is firing on Platform 4. That's impossible. Our systems are hardened against electronic warfare." "It's not electronic warfare, sir. There are humans on Platform 7. They've taken control manually." Kraktor stared in horror as his perfect defensive network turned against itself. Somehow human infiltration teams had reached his supposedly unreachable platforms and were using them as weapons. His own defenses were destroying each other while human ships pressed their attack. The fortress world's shields began failing under concentrated fire from weapons that had been designed to protect it. "General," his aide reported with a shaking voice, "we're receiving surrender signals from 17 ships. The humans are offering terms." "Terms? What terms?" "Full surrender of all ships and personnel. Immediate release of all enslaved populations. War crimes tribunals for commanding officers. Reparations for damages." Kraktor's rage built until he could barely speak. "Tell them we refuse. Signal all remaining ships to fight to the death." But even as he gave the order, more ships began signaling surrender. Hegemony captains who had spent their careers terrorizing weaker species found themselves facing an enemy that was stronger, faster, and more creative than anything they had ever encountered. The battle that was supposed to last days ended in 6 hours. When the last hegemony ship either surrendered or died, Kraktor found himself alone in his command center. His fortress world's shields were down. His fleet was destroyed. His orbital platforms were under human control. And on every planet in the system, slave revolts were burning through the work camps. Sarah Okafor's face appeared on his main screen. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were cold as winter. "General Kraktor, this is Captain Okafor of the Earth Fleet. Your position is hopeless. Surrender now and you will receive a fair trial. Continue to resist, and we will take your fortress by force." "You think you've won?" Kraktor snarled. "This is just one system. The hegemony controls dozens of worlds, hundreds of ships. When they learn what you've done here, they already know," Sarah interrupted. "We've been broadcasting everything on open channels. The entire galaxy can see what happens when the hegemony faces real opposition. It was true. On worlds throughout known space, People watched as the feared hegemony fleet was systematically destroyed by human forces that moved with a precision and creativity that seemed almost supernatural. The humans didn't just win battles. They made victory look easy. "General," Sarah continued, "my Marines are already in your fortress. Your personal guards have surrendered. You can walk out of that command center with dignity, or we can drag you out. Choose quickly." Kraktor looked around his command center one last time. Through the windows he could see human ships moving between the planets of his former empire. Shuttlecraft were landing on worlds where millions of slaves were being freed for the first time in decades. He had always wondered what would happen if the hegemony ever faced a species that fought back with real determination. Now he knew. They lost. Completely. "I surrender," he said quietly. The door to his command center opened and human Marines entered. They were professional and efficient, treating him as a defeated enemy rather than a hated criminal. But Kraktor could see something in their eyes that made him understand why these people were called Deathworlders. They weren't cruel. They weren't savage. But they were utterly determined to protect those who could not protect themselves. And they had the tools and skills to turn that determination into unstoppable force. As he was led away to face judgment, Kraktor heard the human broadcasts continuing on all frequencies. "To all enslaved populations in hegemony space, help is coming. To all species suffering under oppression, you are not forgotten. To all who profit from the suffering of others, your time is over. The Deathworlders are awake, and we remember what it means to be free." The message spread across the galaxy like wildfire. In systems where the hegemony ruled through fear, that fear began turning into hope. Slave revolts erupted on dozens of worlds. Resistance movements that had hidden in shadows for years stepped into the light. The sleeping giant had not just awakened. It had become the champion that the oppressed had always dreamed of, but never thought would come. And this was only the beginning. Marcus Chen wiped the dirt from his hands and looked up at the blue sky of New Harmony. For 30 years he had seen nothing but the gray walls of slave barracks and the black smoke of industrial facilities. Now, for the first time since he was 12 years old, he was breathing free air. The human rescue ships had landed 3 days ago, bringing medical supplies, food, and something even more precious. News from Earth. Marcus learned that he had cousins he had never met, that his home city had expanded beyond recognition, and that humanity had never stopped thinking about the colonies they had left behind. "Marcus!" called Sarah Kim, one of the other freed colonists. "They want to talk to you." Marcus walked toward the command center that the Earth fleet had established in the ruins of the old governor's mansion. Captain Okafor was there, along with several other officers and a woman wearing civilian clothes who introduced herself as Ambassador Walsh. "Mr. Chen," the ambassador said, "we understand you speak 17 languages and know the local population better than anyone else." Marcus nodded. During his years as a slave, he had worked in different camps with people from dozens of species. Learning their languages had helped him organize small acts of resistance and mutual support. "We need your help," Captain Okafor explained. "The hegemony has collapsed completely. Their remaining fleets are surrendering without fighting. But that leaves us with a problem. Hundreds of worlds, billions of people, and no government to maintain order." "What do you want me to do?" Ambassador Walsh smiled. "Help us build something better." Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself traveling between star systems as part of a growing network of translators, negotiators, and organizers. The human fleet had grown as more ships arrived from Earth, but they weren't conquest vessels. They were hospital ships, construction vessels, and diplomatic cruisers. The humans weren't interested in building an empire. They wanted to build a community. Cathara, the Zephyrian captain whose distress call had started everything, found herself aboard the unconquered sun as humanity's new doctrine took shape. She had expected the humans to claim the former hegemony, worlds as prizes of war. Instead, she watched them work tirelessly to return freedom and self-governance to every liberated population. "Captain Okafor," she said during one of their planning sessions, "your people confuse me." "How so?" "You have the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. You could rule over all these worlds, take their resources, demand tribute. Instead, you're spending your own money to rebuild their infrastructure and train their defense forces. Why?" Sarah looked out at the stars visible through the ship's observation deck. "Because that's what we would have wanted someone to do for us." It was a simple answer, but Cathara realized it explained everything. Humans didn't fight for conquest or glory. They fought because they remembered being helpless and had sworn never to let others suffer the same fate. The liberated worlds responded with gratitude that surprised even the humans. Species that had been enemies under hegemony rule began working together to rebuild their shattered societies. Former slave worlds became centers of learning and culture. Trade networks that had been designed to extract wealth began focusing on mutual prosperity. But not everyone was happy with the changes. The Galactic Concordance had spent decades ignoring hegemony atrocities because challenging them seemed too dangerous. Now they watched in growing unease as humanity established a new order based on protection rather than exploitation. Ambassador Tavor of the Concordance arrived in the Hadrian system aboard a diplomatic vessel, requesting a meeting with human leadership. He was a tall, elegant being from a species known for careful diplomacy and political maneuvering. Admiral Chen, who had traveled from Earth to oversee the transition, met with Tavor in a conference room aboard the Unconquered Sun. Admiral, Tavor began carefully, the Concordance is pleased to see the end of hegemony aggression. However, we're concerned about the precedent this sets. What precedent? Unilateral military action. The use of force to change established governments. These actions, however well-intentioned, threaten the stability that the Concordance has worked to maintain. Chen studied the alien diplomat's face. Ambassador, your stability was built on ignoring the suffering of billions of people. How stable do you think that really was? The galaxy has many problems, Admiral. But military force rarely provides lasting solutions. You're right, Chen agreed. That's why we're not using military force to govern these worlds. We're using it to give them the freedom to govern themselves. Tavor shifted uncomfortably. The Concordance fears that other species might follow humanity's example. That disputes which were previously resolved through negotiation might now be settled through warfare. Let me be clear, Ambassador, Chen said firmly. Humanity will not interfere in legitimate disputes between sovereign peoples. We will not involve ourselves in territorial conflicts or trade disagreements, but we will not stand by while innocent populations are enslaved, tortured, or exterminated. If the Concordance finds that threatening, perhaps it needs to examine its own values. The meeting ended without agreement, but Tavor left with a clear understanding of humanity's position. They were not seeking to rule the galaxy, but they would protect those who could not protect themselves. Word of this conversation spread quickly through diplomatic channels, and the response varied dramatically. Some species, those who had lived in fear of stronger neighbors, welcomed the idea of human protection. Others, particularly those who had profited from the old system of exploitation, began quietly arming themselves. But the strongest response came from an unexpected source: the freed populations themselves. On world after world, former slaves and oppressed peoples began organizing their own defense forces. They studied human military tactics, adopted human technologies, and most importantly, embraced human values of protection and mutual aid. The movement spread beyond former hegemony space as species throughout the galaxy began demanding better treatment from their leaders. Marcus Chen, now serving as a coordinator for interspecies cooperation, found himself in a meeting with representatives from 40 different worlds. We want to formalize our relationship with humanity, declared Vexhai, Cathara's former communications officer, who had become a political leader on his homeworld, not as subjects or allies, but as partners in a new kind of galactic community. What did you have in mind? Marcus asked. A covenant, replied Jexara, a former hegemony slave who now led the government of her liberated world. A mutual promise. Humanity protects those who cannot protect themselves. The rest of us support humanity and each other in building a galaxy where protection is no longer needed. The new covenant, as it came to be known, was signed on the first anniversary of the Battle of Hadrian's Gate. 67 worlds joined initially, with more requesting membership each month. The document was simple but revolutionary. Every signatory world committed to the protection of sentient rights within their borders. Member worlds would assist each other in defense against external aggression. Disputes between members would be resolved through arbitration, not warfare. No member would profit from the slavery or oppression of any sentient being. Humanity would serve as the enforcement arm until member worlds could defend themselves. The signing ceremony took place on New Harmony, in a rebuilt city where former slaves worked alongside their former masters' children to build a better future. Cathara, now serving as the Covenant's first Secretary General, read the document aloud in a dozen languages. Captain Okafor, promoted to Admiral after her victories against the hegemony, stood before the assembled delegates and delivered humanity's pledge. We promise you this. No distress call will go unanswered. No cry for help will be ignored. No people will be abandoned to suffer while we have the power to intervene. This is our covenant with you, and with ourselves. As the ceremony ended and delegates from dozens of worlds mingled in celebration, Admiral Chen stood with Marcus and watched the sunset over New Harmony's rebuilt capital. "Do you think it will work?" Marcus asked. Chen was quiet for a moment. "I think it will work as long as we remember why we started. The moment we forget that we're here to serve others instead of ruling them, we become what we fought against. And, if others challenge us, the Concordance isn't happy with these changes. Other powers might see opportunity in our commitment to protection. Let them come," Chen replied calmly. "We've learned something important these past months. Strength isn't just about having the biggest fleet or the best weapons. True strength comes from knowing that when you fight for something worth protecting." Above them, human ships patrolled the system alongside vessels from a dozen other species. The ships were different in design and origin, but they shared a common purpose, ensuring that the strong could not prey upon the weak. The galaxy had a new order now, not an empire built on conquest, but a community built on protection. The sleeping giant had awakened not as a conqueror, but as a guardian, and in the darkness between the stars, automated beacons continued to broadcast humanity's promise to the galaxy. "This is humanity. We're listening. If you're in trouble, if you need help, if you're facing enemies you cannot defeat alone, call for us.